June 1940. The Allied armies are in disarray and the British Expeditionary Force are surrounded at Dunkirk. France is still hanging on, but the soldiers are fleeing and it looks like the writing is on the wall. So why did Germany halt their forces, letting 338,000 Allied soldiers go, instead of letting the panzers race off to victory? Let's find out. After the relative calm of the phony war, the Battle of France breaks out in dramatic fashion on the 10th of May 1940, and pretty quickly the Allied countries find themselves overwhelmed by the German Wehrmacht. Their defensive line is shattered and they're outmanoeuvred and creatively outthought on the battlefield. After a series of failed counterattacks, hundreds of thousands of Allied troops, mostly made up of the British Expeditionary Force, are encircled. Within a matter of days, the situation becomes so dire that without informing the French, the British begin planning Operation Dynamo on the 20th of May, the evacuation of the BEF. Brigadier Gerald Whitfield is initially sent to aid the rescue and describes what he sees as a somewhat alarming movement towards Dunkirk by both officers and men. The scramble to get off the continent leads to officers who were meant to stay behind to aid the evacuation disappearing on the boats too. Meanwhile, the Germans continue their relentless advance, but then, on the 23rd of May, Rundstedt orders a pause, most likely at the recommendation of von Kluge. The initial concerns were most likely the army flanks and supply, but also the marshy ground and terrain. The following day, on May the 24th, Hitler visits Army Group A headquarters and also endorses the order, further prolonging the pause into what we now know as the Dunkirk Halt order. The initial plan had been for Rundstedt, who was holding the west of the salient, to strike and launch into the static armies of Bock in the east, but the pause prevents this from happening, and it's reasonable to assume that this pause provides valuable time the British need, given their desperate situation, to get their soldiers evacuated. Rundstedt, himself responsible in large part, would later claim that this actually marked a major turning point in the war. Regardless of what may or may not have been recommended to him, it does seem an odd decision for Hitler to make. So why did it come about, and was it even intended? I'm going to try and make sense of it, focusing on the three most likely reasons, all of which have been debated for decades. Reason number one. Hitler wanted to keep his armies intact. Now the merits here obviously lie with the fact that it is desirable to preserve armour for upcoming battles. Bock's army were beginning to suffer air attacks by the RAF, though not by the heavy bombers of the Bomber Command, but it still could have been a cause for concern. Half of Kleist's Panzer Corps were out of action, and so too a third of Hoth's Panzer Corps. But, as Len Dayton points out, much of these were easily rectifiable within a few short hours. It is however unclear how aware the High Command would have been of this. Hitler would have been surprised in his victories, and may have expected more counterattacks. The weather may have also been a factor. Bad weather would be bad news for the German way of war, a war of movement, and the Flanders marshes would be particularly difficult for tank action. Hitler himself later noted that the weather was a factor in the halt. However, while the weather wasn't great, it wasn't until the 27th of May that the heavy rain really broke out, and that was 3 days after Hitler agreed to halt his army. Reason number two. Hermann Göring had assured Hitler that the Luftwaffe could finish the job. To add credence to this idea, Göring had written to Hitler requesting he be given permission to capture the pocket and assuring Hitler that any chance of rescue would be impossible. In theory, this could have had a bearing on Hitler's decision, especially if he felt his army was exposed. We need to remember there was no experience nor historical tradition of amphibious operations, and German leadership may have feared unnecessary losses with regards to men and material on the ground more than a successful evacuation of the enemy. If this is true, it does answer both why Hitler halted his army and Directive number 13, in which Hitler called for the capture of the Allied soldiers while halting his own armies at the same time. Finally, reason number three. Hitler wanted peace with Britain. This is often seen as the least plausible of the three options, and it's here that we must remember that prior to the two great wars, wars were typically fought very differently. It just wasn't seen as honourable to destroy your opponent's army. If Hitler destroyed the British army, this could give up any chance of a peace being possible. Brian Bond rejects this theory, but what do we have on it? Well, we do have Hitler's political testimony. dated the 26th of February 1945, where Hitler laments that Church was quite unable to appreciate the sporting spirit to which he had shown the British soldiers in letting them go. On the other hand, we have Directive Number 13, which was issued on the 24th of May, and that called for the capture of the Allied forces still in the pocket. For many this is conclusive, only it came about right at the same time that Hitler ordered his army to halt, and that wasn't lifted until the 26th of May, by which time the evacuation was well underway, and the moment was lost. Rundstedt did later acknowledge that he had his suspicions that Hitler wanted to give the British a chance, but again, this is highly debated. So, it is probable that all three scenarios could have played out. Fears of unnecessary losses and possible counterattacks would have been a worry for the German High Command. Goering's confidence in the Luftwaffe may have been attractive, as it would allow the army to head south and defeat France, and of course peace with Britain would have been desirable too. It's also possible that conflicting ideas over a very short and frenetic time led to a mix of orders, which led to the moment being lost. And as to how confident the Germans were with regards to a British escape is also interesting. We know Churchill's hopes were low, but he showed resolve and asked for anything that could float to get his soldiers back. He would later remark regarding the successful evacuation, "We must be very careful not to assign this deliverance the attributes of a victory. Wars are not won by evacuations." Regardless, the Dunkirk spirit was born and Britain would keep fighting. Rundstedt dubbed it one of the great turning points of the war, and Manstein claimed it was one of Hitler's most critical mistakes. But as to how it happened and who is really responsible, well, that'll probably be debated for many more decades to come. So, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video today, please like and comment, and I'd love to hear any ideas you have on the Halt order. And I look forward to hopefully seeing you and having you back for the next video. Bye for now.